Hello, and welcome to today's lecture, The Seeds of War, Greece versus Persia, Part 1. I'm your host, Dr. Rob Steffen, and today we are going to see what happens when Greece starts to run into the Persian Empire invading from the east. We'll start by contextualizing what's going on with Persia at this time. Then we'll start to see what are the seeds of war, what's causing this conflict between the Persian Empire and the Greek city-states. From there, we're going to talk about one of the most famous battles in this conflict, the Battle of Marathon, and then we'll conclude with a few thoughts on the impact of the Greek victory in that battle. So, let's go ahead and set the scene. Remember that the Bronze Age starts about 5,000 years ago, around 3000 BC, and for the next 1800 years we see the rise of complexity, the rise of civilization, things like monumental architecture and writing and technology, all these things, but slowly kind of coming to an end with the Dark Ages as these civilizations begin to collapse. They forget how to write, they build much smaller buildings, they live in much smaller settlements. But from there, starting in the 8th century, we see the rise of what we start to associate with classical Greece. But this is all happening in the period that we call the Archaic, from around 750 to around 480 BC. And one of the characteristics of this in Greece is that power is dispersing to the people. And we see that with the rise of democracy, the reforms of Cleisthenes, right at the end of the 6th century BC. Now, what Cleisthenes' reforms do is they end up giving the power to the people. And what that ends up meaning is that for everything, the people get to vote on it. There are different people each year who make up the Council of 500. The council itself decides what needs a vote, and then all Athenian male citizens get together and do that voting. And so in a way, it's quite different from what we think of with American democracy today. Now, what's going on in Persia at this same time? Well, we've seen that Persia is the culmination of a bunch of Near Eastern empires. So we see the Assyrians incredibly militaristic with their torture and terror tactics, impaling people and flaying people. We see the richness of these kingdoms in Anatolia, first with the Phrygians and King Midas, right? You get a myth like the Midas touch because the Greeks thought this guy was so stinking wealthy. That's also embodied in the Lydian Empire with people like Croesus, also known for his wealth. And then eventually we saw with the Medes and the Persians back in the Near East, back in the Mesopotamian region, in Iran, with the rise of Persia that eventually takes over the Medes, and then eventually the Lydians, eventually making their way all the way to the Aegean. Now, let's take a little look here at what actually ends up happening with these different empires, and starting from the end of the Bronze Age, going all the way until Greece and Persia come into conflict with one another. All right, so just look how quick at the end there, Persia takes over everything. And the reason is, when you're dealing with a bunch of very large empires, all you need to do is take over that capital city, and then all the land that they had conquered becomes yours. And so what we see, right, Persia starting way down here, expanding by conquering the Median Empire, and then the Lydians, and then the Babylonians, all the way down to the Egyptians. And so when Greece and Persia come into conflict with one another, we get a map that looks just basically comical, right? With Greece being this tiny little thing over here, and Persia being the rest of almost the rest of the known world. So they've come into contact geographically, but what is it that sparks the conflict between them? And it all begins with Croesus. So we've talked a little bit about him as being a really rich dude, as asking that question, right? Am I happy? Or who's the happiest man in the world? And the Greek Solon saying, well, don't let anybody who's alive call himself happy. Bad things can still happen. And then what Croesus ends up doing is getting into a conflict with the Persians, losing that battle, and he ends up not being very happy in the end. But during his life, one of the ways that Croesus got very wealthy was by taxing the Ionian city-states, right? So these Greek city-states along the west coast of Turkey, Croesus is levying these taxes on them, and eventually kind of really almost making them part of the Lydian Empire. And once Persia takes over, they bring those Ionian city-states into their kind of sphere of influence, even with an even heavier hand, even more taxes, that sort of thing. And we get some of the leaders of the Ionian Greek city-states trying to ally with the Persians to get more power within their own city-states. And what ends up happening is one of those alliances goes bad. So one of the Greek guys realizes he can't pay back a huge loan that he took from the Persians, and as a result, he decides the Greeks are going to rebel. And so they march on Sardis, the capital of the satrapy, right? The satrapy is the Persian term for province. So they march on Sardis, the capital of the satrapy, and they burn the city to the ground in 494 BC. The Persians don't take too kindly to this. What they end up doing is they end up getting their army together, marching on the Greek city-states, first Miletus, and then the rest of the Ionian city-states the following year, and they end up burning all those cities to the ground. And then they start looking for who helped them in this rebellion. And they realize that Athens was one of the main city-states backing the rebellion. And so what the Persians end up doing is they end up sailing across the Aegean Sea, and they stop by Athens, and they stop by Sparta, and they ask them for both earth and water, a symbol of their submission to the Persian rule. Now Athens, well, they don't really like this message. And so they take the herald who brought them that message, they cut off the herald's head. And down in Sparta, you might know this from the movie, right? They ask the Spartans for earth and water, and the Spartans say, you want earth and water, come get it yourself. Now the Persians don't think that's necessarily a bad idea. They say, okay, we will come get it ourselves. And so what they do is they put together a small force by Persian standards, something like 30,000 people. They sail across the Aegean, burning city-states as they're going, and then they land on the shore just outside of Athens. And this is where we're going to get one of the most famous battles the world has seen, something known as the Battle of Marathon. Now, Athens isn't particularly well equipped to fight the Persians. They've got a very small population, and because each city-state is independent, it's not a guarantee that the other city-states will rally to their cause. And so the Athenians only have 9,000 or 10,000 people. And so what they do is they send a guy by the name of Phidippides, who runs from Athens all the way to Sparta to ask for help. And so we see our guy Phidippides here starting way up in Attica in the city of Athens, and then running somewhere around the 150 miles down to Sparta, asking the Spartans for help. And what do the Spartans say? They say, oh, the omens don't look very good. And if the omens don't look good, we can't send help, so I'm sorry. And Phidippides has to make his way all the way back up there and tell the Athenians no help is coming. Now, while Phidippides was doing this, Miltiades, the Athenian general, had taken his 9,000 or 10,000 troops from the city of Athens out to the site of Marathon, and that's a beach town, essentially, where the Persian ships are coming to land. And so he gets his troops ready there, and they actually are terrified. They actually get together, and as a group, they take a vote on whether to actually fight the Persians or essentially just wall up in the city and hope that the Persians can't besiege them. Now, they vote 6-5 to actually go to war, and at this point, our guy Phidippides needs to run from the city of Athens way out to Marathon. This is the Bay of Marathon right here, and deliver the message that no help is coming. So let's take a look at how the Battle of Marathon actually plays out.
To push back against the Persians, no one's done it successfully before.
But there'd never been an army like this before. the 10,000 Athenians were now free and equal men. Bound by a communal sense of brotherhood, they weren't about to surrender their hard-won rights over to an autocratic ruler.
One of the really unique things about Greece is the way in which those bonds of community translate into the way they fight. It's intimately cooperative.
Right down to the way they hold their 16-pound shields.
The shield, quite famously, extends 1.5 feet to the left of an individual fighter. When he's holding the shield up, half of the shield is covering the person to his left. The whole ethic of the fight is built around that mutual protection. Stand there and protect your neighbor.
The Greeks stood shield over shield in a 4-day standoff against the Persians, until finally, in what seemed a desperate move, they charged the much larger army. When the Athenian center seemed to falter, the Persians pushed forward, only to find themselves surrounded by the Greeks' stronger flanks. It was a rout. The Persians lost 6,400 soldiers, according to Herodotus. The Greeks, only 192.
So, in the Battle of Marathon, we see 9,000 or 10,000 Greeks going up against 30,000 Persians in amazingly winning a decisive victory. Now, they're not out of the woods yet. There are actually a bunch of people back in the city of Athens who are ready to betray the Greeks to the Persians. Essentially open the city gates and say, all right, Persians, spare my life, and I will let you into the city. And so what happens right after the victory, our guy Phidippides, he needs to run the 26.2 miles from the site of the Battle of Marathon to the city of Athens, and he's got to deliver word to the people there that somehow the Athenians have pulled off the impossible. They've actually defeated the Persians in battle. And so once he's run that 26.2 miles from Marathon to Athens, you got to remember that he had to run 26.2 out there, 26.2 back, 150 miles down to Sparta earlier that week, and 150 miles back. So he's done something like 350 miles in a single week. And he delivers the news that the Greeks had won, and then he falls over and dies. All right, and in the aftermath of the Battle of Marathon, we see the Persian king Darius more furious than he's ever been. But here's where the Greeks get a little bit lucky. First, Darius dies before he can ever reinvade Greece. He builds up this massive army to do so, but he dies before he can actually execute the plan. And his successor, Xerxes, well, he ends up having to deal with a rebellion down in Egypt, and he's just not that interested in dealing with Greece to begin with. Now, he's going to get interested, but that's going to be a little bit later. So, a few kind of concluding thoughts. One is that Greece and Persia are really different places. Persia is this massive empire, right, led by a single king, whereas Greece is this kind of small area with a bunch of very small city-states, all independently governed. And what we end up seeing is that Greece is the first group that really opposes Persia successfully. And in the Battle of Marathon, it's a very small battle. 10,000 versus 30,000 is fairly small in the big scope of things. But the Greek victory there kind of goes down as this legendary event in Greek history. And we'll see that that ends up having repercussions on the Persian side when they come back. So, thanks for paying attention today to The Seeds of War.